Okay.
All right, should I start first? I think I put the first thing on the agenda. Nominate Daniel to become a member of our product security working group. Many of you already know Daniel. He served release manager, I believe, for like 2 of the releases. I think was Istio 1.15, I would say. Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong. And Daniel is also a documentation maintainer. He's been contributing a lot to the docs. Okay, release 15 and 16. Thank you, Daniel. So many of you know, Daniel gets work done. He's very highly respected in the community, and he's also one of our experts within Solo for pipeline. So I think he'll be a very valuable asset to the product security working group. Any objections?
As I'm typing, no, I don't think there's any objections from my end. I think this is good. The only thing we should just follow up on making it more clear on what, for PS, the security group, it's based on companies to some extent due to the private nature. So adding people from existing companies should be easier, but we should also write how we do it, because we don't have a process. So it's just kind of random and onboarding. So we can take those as action items in the working group.
I thought there was a documented process, actually.
I think there is to join. It was to join as a company, and then before we had it company based, there was to join as an individual, but it was a really high bar because it wasn't company based. So, recently we added a second member from Microsoft, and we've added many members from Google over the years. And, pretty low fanfare as it should be. We're more than happy to have more people helping.
Okay, well, no objection here.
Yeah, that sounds good, John. I can work with whoever needs to, sharpen that onboarding documents for existing company if needed. Eric, sorry.
No, I was going to say I'm fine with Daniel as well, and I guess if you're going to tweak the document, it might be good to, if a company is changing somebody, right? So, person X is leaving and person Y is joining from a particular company to replace them.
Yeah, is that required though? Can we add people, or do we have to swap out an existing member?
I don't necessarily say we have to.
No, I think it's good to add
somebody.
I think it's good to add multiple. Like in a normal working group, it's not like there's limits. We don't want limits. We just want to limit the number of people that have access to it. And if you're already in the company that has access, then you also have access. So.
But I was just thinking, if for some reason person X didn't want to be in the working group anymore, but that might be the last one from a company. What's the best way to just push another person in, process-wise?
Yeah, sounds good. So any objection from any other TOC member? Justin?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. Justin?
I just want to make the point that, yeah, I agree with John that we should be able to allow more than one person from a company to join, and it should probably be based on company. But I think we need to be careful about not just saying that because you're a member of that company, that it's carte blanche that you can join the product security working group.
Yep.
So I just wanted to add that note. So.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That's also why I have to ask TOC for approval. It's not like I can just approve by Daniel. I want the community to be aware of, based on Daniel's existing work in the community, to approve it.
Oh yeah. I was making a comment. If we were going to update the documentation, I think the documentation should reflect that there needs to be some process from within a company to say this person does have rights to view this information. Just like at Google, not everybody has visibility into all of the CVEs that we're discussing.
Yep, sounds good. All right, if everybody is good, thank you for all the comments and approval for this. So I guess, Daniel, we will work with you on the process. Sounds like you have approval from everybody in the call here to become a member of the Product Security Working Group. So congratulations, Daniel, and this is a continued reinforcement of your work. Excellent working Istio community. The next topic, I didn't add it on the agenda, but so thank you to whoever added to the agenda. So last night, I did send a message to all the general channel, the announcement channel. I also sent 2 messages to discuss. Effectively, we are planning to archive, discuss.istio.io. I need to figure out how to do that. I'm hopefully as an admin, I will be able to do that. But also immediately we want to have people using GitHub discussion in Istio/Istio as the forum for people to ask questions. Ideally, I think it's better than, way better than discuss, because there's no spam there. It's also better, I think, than Slack because it's searchable, it's archived, and as part of the steering committee, we still haven't really figured out how to factor your contribution in GitHub discussions into the annual steering seats allocation, but it's our plan to figure that out. So, Eric, go ahead.
So I was the one who added your comment, or I figured you'd want to talk about it here. I did make a comment in one of the threads. I think as long as we continue with the process that we're using today for steering, which I believe is using contributions as the count, discussions, either opening or answering a discussion counts as a GitHub contribution. So it should be automatic, I would think. I just verified, I guess, that DevStats contributions match GitHub contributions, but I did throw a link out there that GitHub contributions should count against the contributions. And we moved to that a while ago for steering, I think. We used to do PRs, but I think you moved to contributions a year or 2 ago.
We use DevStats, which is provided by CNCF. So we actually count more than GitHub contributions from what I know. So the tool right now, based on what John and Craig told me, doesn't necessarily count what's how you help out in discuss. So we're still trying to figure that out. Louis, were you trying to chime in?
Yeah, do we actually want to do that? Right, I mean, there's like discuss, right, was a lot of support questions, right?
We do. The reason we do is we feel very bad if we move people from discuss.istio.io into GitHub and it still become like a ghost forum where nobody is willing to answer questions.
No. Like I'm totally fine with people moving to discuss, like GitHub discussions. That's fine, but until we show that. Are you talking about answering questions or asking questions?
I mean, so right now, whenever you open up an issue in GitHub, you are counted as one contribution to Istio.
Yes.
Whenever you make a comment into any of our GitHub issues, you're counted as one contribution to Istio. So we see open up a discussion in GitHub discussion is not different, right? Because what problem you have could potentially help somebody else out down the road, given it's searchable, it's archived. So we do want to count them, right? Because it's good for our project.
I'm not in steering anymore, but I could see pros and cons to that. Right, issues are a little bit more focused, right? And we do try to ask people to make sure that they provide a decent amount of information, right? We don't count Slack, right, for contributions. Okay, let's see how it goes.
Well, your feedback is great. Maybe we can refine it as to who resolve a discussion, right? So that still needs to be discussed, and in steering. But the key is we want to motivate people to help out each other, right? That's the other thing, because you've seen a lot. Yeah, and we have to be able to put some measurable way to motivate that, right?
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice if there was something like Stack Overflow where you could kind of give people kudos or something like that, and that would count.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know if that's part of what
they track like contributions and stuff on it, and you can say top contributor, give them some accolade of some sort.
Yeah, top.
I actually personally like to not say what the steering committee contribution metric is and change it up every once in a while without telling anyone, so that people don't game the system. So I would love to say discussions may or may not be part of the contribution formula, but there's obviously downsides to that as well.
Yeah, at least the message I sent out is we're looking. It wasn't confirmed, right? Which is true. We are looking at.
Yeah. I will say in the past we looked at all the different types of metrics and they all gave the same results anyway, so it's kind of moot. We just picked one. So.
Yeah. Right. Oh.
And thanks for pointing out the DevStat thing, John. I didn't know what they were using.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't. I think it's just a GitHub being silly thing because they have it. They have the discussion event for other things, but not for the thing that DevStats reads from. So, oh well. It's a GitHub issue, Keith. Why it's not in DevStats? Well, I mean, they could re-architect their platform, I suppose, but the data source they're reading from doesn't have all the events that GitHub can produce for whatever reason.
Are these all the GitHub events, period?
Yeah. So I don't know why, like GitHub only has on this. So we read DevStats reads from GitHub Archive, which reads from these event types, and for some reason the discussion comment event is not among that list of events, but it's in some other list of events. So I don't know. GitHub's API is kind of interesting to work with.
Yes, no argument there, sure.
So I don't know why it's not there.
Well, I will say DevStats does have its own schema. There are some SQL files in the DevStats. If you go to istio.devstats and look into one of the, some of the live views, it shows the schema there. And so my assumption would be adding a new event would require updating the DevStats schema. I'll grab a link here in a second. So that's why I say it might be, there's probably some delta of work required from the CNCF to get that to work. So that's just would be my assumption. Here's the SQL file.
Yeah, that's a good point, Louis. We will follow up on this in various forms, but for now, we should say discussions are here. Please help contribute to them, and they may or may not result in contributions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably just when steering does that, just let everybody know what the next election date is, I guess, or whatever that thing is called at this point. Okay, next topic, John. Do you want to talk about this?
I think it may be best for you to go over it because then you're going over my docket and it's somewhat more collaborative. And
all right. Present this bad boy. Okay, so everybody can read that. So there's been a lot of back and forth as part of the beta discussion about the best way to start enrolling things into the mesh as part of Ambient. And so there's a couple of docs going on right now. One is a doc that I made about how to define a strict contract between the waypoint layer and the Z-tunnel layer so that those two layers are independently replaceable. right? And so that we can have a contract and conformance tests around that, and that would allow people to bring their own waypoint implementations, for example. And there are several folks in this community who have strong interest in doing that, or need to do it. Solo is one, Google is another, I believe Microsoft is another, and I suspect there will be many, many more. And so John also had this proposal document. I'm not going to show you the piece above it, which is how to make it possible to just enroll services, and also use kind of normal or very standard and well understood Kubernetes APIs to enroll them in a very Kubernetes somewhat native way. John and I had a lot of debate about that. And obviously one of the hotter topics in that discussion is, can we support workloads in that model? Because this too supports applying policy to workloads. So John and I discussed quite a bit, and he took a stab at writing up what it would look like to create a waypoint using some other implementation and enroll it in the mesh, and how we would go about doing that. So there's this kind of basic setup. And so we have a gateway, and it's an Nginx gateway. So it's, just as an example, it is a waypoint, and it has listeners on the ports. But if you look, the listeners are named after services. So you see there's a listener named foo, there's an HTTP route foo, but there's also a service called foo in the same namespace. And so by creating a listener with the same name as a service and telling people that it's a waypoint, we are telling the lower layer, the L4 layer, to send traffic for that service foo to this waypoint. And so that's the kind of basic structure of the construct here, is that we use listeners as a way to declare specific services to enroll, and then bind them to listening ports on a standard gateway. Then obviously there's information about the protocol, and in this case we said HTTP. And so what will happen is zTunnel will, in this situation, look at traffic going to service foo, and zTunnel captures by VIP. It will redirect that traffic to the waypoint, probably in sandwich mode, because this Nginx instance is not speaking HBone, and it will send it to port 80 in this case. And that should work, right? Nginx can be configured to do whatever it does, based on HTTP routes or Nginx specific routes or something else. And if it routes traffic to foo or bar or umbrella service, who knows, who cares, but that should work. And so this is a way to do services oriented declarations of traffic capture within the gateway API. Right, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, if you look in here, we need to tell the zTunnel a little bit more if we want a more comprehensive capture, right? So that covers the case of specific services. We probably also want a way to handle all services, and also to workload traffic that is not bound to or targeted at a Kubernetes service, but is just going direct to a pod or some other type of workload. And so there's discussion in this doc about how to describe the scope of capture within the API, and then also what protocol should be used to talk to that waypoint. And so what you saw above was basically what you would consider kind of TCP plain traffic, where zTunnel in sandwich mode in this case would have de-encapsulated HBone and just sent it to the listener port. There's also probably likely to be a mode where if you declare all services and you want to just capture all traffic, then you can either send traffic forward traffic to the waypoint IP on the original destination port. And there's some discussion of that in the comments here. And also, if you want to handle workload traffic, you would have to handle either the proxy protocol or HBone directly, right? Because you need to know the original destination IP, right? And it's very unlikely that a waypoint implementation that was not aware of that could actually handle that traffic. And so it should just declare the protocol that it's going to listen on. And so all of these are supportable with the sandwich. Obviously, only directly terminating HBone is supportable without the sandwich. So the sandwich is pretty critical to making this work. But that is basically the gist of the solution. And then obviously this starts to feed into how we describe people using authorization policy and other things and how they bind to waypoints. There's another document, which is the layer targeted authorization policy that Keith and others worked on back in the late summer, I believe. Yeah, Keith and Jackie from Microsoft were working on that. So we started to have conversations about bringing that into alignment, possibly with this proposal and the layering proposal. So John, did I do it justice? Probably things you want to add, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah, no, I think you did do it justice. I would say that some of the details are a bit rough, probably. And I would say like we talked about this on Friday and then drafted up, and now it's Monday morning. So definitely some rough edges. But the core parts is not all the exact details and syntax, but kind of the high-level concepts of we use stock gateway API, and you can plug in any gateway API provider, and it just works because we're doing 100% standard things, and we're just adding kind of the secure transport layer capabilities to that. So go ahead, Qasim.
Yeah, one comment is it would help a lot if we stopped using made-up words and like sandwich and other things. I mean, it's much cleaner if we think of it as we have the L for security, L for network, L for policies, which are pretty standard and don't need a new name. And then we have gateways. And yes, the main question is what do we do if we intercept some or redirect some IPs, or we rely only on reserved and allocated IPs or names for the gateways themselves. But that's kind of the main thing that is a bit tricky, but the rest it's pretty straightforward. I mean, there is absolutely nothing special about what we call sandwich or HBone. It's just some standards that ensure network security and what we need.
I kind of agree. I would say that some of the modes are not transparent to the application, though. So we're not just doing, standard transparent networking. Some of them are, so like that is the same there. But some of them, it's like there's a proxy sandwich where we do proxy protocol. That's not part of the API, of course. There's doing direct HBone to it.
Yeah, there's obviously a continuum, right? From like a gateway doesn't really have to know anything about Istio to work in this world, up to, right, if you want to do fancier things like handle two workload traffic, then you do have to know, right? Because you have to be capable of being a forward proxy, and probably if you want to implement all of Istio's authorization policy, which you don't have to do, then you probably need to know information about the destination, at least for some use cases, right? So but what it offers is a graduated experience, right? Is if you want to do more, you can opt into a tighter binding.
Yeah, but there is a standard and there are extensions. So I completely agree with you both. But my point is, I want to make sure we focus on standards, not on the weird things we do or extension or non-standard, the optional things.
Yeah, I mean, sandwich is really traffic redirection. I don't know if there's a standard name for it. So right now, sandwich is just a term used to describe the architecture. I'm not suggesting we put sandwich in user-facing docs. But right now it's just a convenience so people understand how this is happening. But yeah, we probably should not use the word sandwich in user-facing docs. Keith?
Yeah, so I like the idea of a graduated experience for sure. One of the things that I might have just missed, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like with this proposal, there is still a requirement that the Z tunnel or the secure transport layer, any secure transport layer implementation has to still know about waypoints. Is that the case?
It is the case, yes. The thing it needs is a mapping from, well, there's two modes. There's the workload mode and the service mode. So for respectively, either a mapping of service to gateway or workload to gateway, or both if you support both modes.
Okay, that's not quite as, I don't want to say bad, but that's not quite as awkward as I think we were talking about before. Because one of the impetuses, I think, for the original service-oriented waypoint approach was that, we want to try to provide, to Costin's point, more standard protocols for things and waypoints. This very special thing that the Z tunnel has to know about, and it's kind of like a gateway, but not really. I think the service approach with Gateway API makes sense. I do think there's probably some syntactical, semantic work that has to happen to make sure we're fully compliant with the spec. But yeah, I think that the idea of mapping a service to a gateway is a construct that exists, I'm sure, in other places, in other segments of the industry. Not quite as much in Kubernetes, but I think that's maybe a standard either we could develop or take a stab at initially. But yeah, not as awkward as I was thinking.
Yeah, I will say like the difference between this and the current state in terms of what the network has to do is subtle. In the current state, you take a service, you resolve it to a workload, and then that workload has a waypoint or not. In this model, you would just be direct service to waypoint, which can make things a bit simpler for some implementations. The other thing, I didn't spec this out because I ran out of time, but in this, we're saying we do this IP rewriting. I think it's potentially possible that you don't do that. Well, you could just not do it, but then the user experience is horrendous, right? All your clients probably break. But you could potentially be in an environment where you own the DNS server and could rewrite DNS to do it at that layer instead. From the gateway perspective, it just needs the traffic to get there, right? It doesn't really matter how. So that may have some other issues. And it's not as simple as in like the super service case, we replaced service. So there was no DNS entry. So we had a DNS entry. That's much easier to do. To say that we already have a service and that service still exists, but now we're replacing the DNS entry, that's probably a lot harder to pull off, unless you own the full stack as you do at Microsoft or Google.
Yeah, I mean, John and I had quite a bit of discussion about the reliability or otherwise, or ability to use DNS, right? Z-tunnel operates at L4 itself, right? Z-tunnel doesn't really know about DNS. It really just knows about the binding between service and VIP, at least in the current state of the API. And generally speaking, VIP is more reliable. Like John said, you can use a DNS-based capture, but that can lead to issues, right, around aliasing and things like that as well. So it seemed practical to do IP capture, which is what we've been doing. If people want to do DNS capture as well, or have an alternate implementation where DNS capture is reliable, then they are obviously welcome to do it. Although I'm not sure how you get DNS capture to be fully reliable. And so that's a little bit of a headache. Hence the suggestion to do IP-based capture and targeting. One thing that we didn't cover here, and is in theory, you could capture specific workloads and not all workloads, right? Because IP capture allows you to do that too. So you could actually capture a deployment. And in theory, you don't even have to use gateway to be a waypoint. You could actually use a deployment as a waypoint. as long as it met the status contract in some reasonable way. That would probably only work for, you know, capturing all or capturing something like that, but there's no actual requirement to use gateway. But obviously it's convenient and it will make sense to a lot of people to do that from UX standpoints. We should definitely do that. But we don't actually have to tie ourselves to that, right? If you use Nginx as a deployment, we could actually in theory bind that as well, as long as we can discover its endpoints.
Yeah, I think I would still rather, even if you just have a deployment, have the user create a gateway to represent it. I've had a lot of designs where I said, let's use deployment, and then I talked myself out of it because, well, do you support daemon sets, replica sets, and like the list of 100 other ones? So it always goes off a cliff there.
Yeah,
I don't hate it, but we should at least acknowledge that it's never universal there. So
yeah, no, that's for sure, right? You'd have to meet a status field requirement at least for discoverability. But I digress. Anyway, Austin?
One comment. On the DNS issue, I want to make clear it's not really DNS. DNS is you can have proxy gRPC or SOCKS or other protocols that have absolutely no relation with DNS. You can have no DNS server at all. What we are talking about is using FQDNs to represent service names, as you know, HTTP standard is written with the authority header and all that. And really, what capture also is completely irrelevant. I mean, you could have an entire implementation that has no capture; it's just using FQDNs and the absolute standards, and it will work perfectly fine. All capture and DNS intersection, all the other stuff are extras or optionals or enhancements that should not be a required part of a mesh, because again, if you need them, you need them. If not, you can use just the standards and be as compatible with more implementations.
Well, by capture, we mean, Costin, how does the Z-tunnel know to send traffic to the waypoint or not?
Yeah, and that's completely irrelevant. I mean, if you use FQDNs with either DNS or with whatever other mechanisms to map FQDNs to a particular destination, no problem. I mean, it's www.google.com. It goes to an IP address that is dedicated for that. So standard routing. There is nothing special to. The capture is needed only if you want to capture an IP that is previously used for other things, like reuse a cluster IP or use an IP that has, and then route it to a different destination. But that's called routing normally in the internet. So software-defined network or VPC or anyone who can do routing can take care of it. It's not necessarily something special. So
yeah, so I think there's a few things there. Like if you just have 100% standard gateway, you have your own enterprise, I don't know, example.com org for your DNS, and you say foo.example.com instead of use the cluster local. You can't just do that today. You don't need any Istio. We obviously won't break that because they're intending to layer on top of things and not break things. What you might want, though, is to say that you want the secure transport handled for you to that thing, which I think could work in some cases. Like if we say, okay, we want to do the H-bone tunnel to it, and there is an IP address associated with the gateway, we could say in Z-tunnel, traffic going to that IP address, which got there from their DNS, will use this secure transport. That would work fine for some cases, but for others, you would probably have the VIP there. And once it gets to Z-tunnel, oh, actually, never mind. I was thinking of, never mind. I think that would work. Because you'd see the VIP in Z-tunnel, you'd look up to the gateway and see that you should tunnel it. I mean, we'd have to make it work, and we'd have to add that as part of our contract, but it seems plausible to me. Actually, I suppose yes, we would probably need to make it work because we were saying we'd have a mapping of service to waypoint. We would just need to make sure that we have a mapping of, if you just directly send a waypoint, that we also understand that as well.
Well, that would just be like to a workload as if any other kind of IP, John, right? Like, I think that just works as well.
Well, you want to use the node they specified in the gateway, right? And we actually get it to the gateway VIP, which may or may not be representing an in-cluster service. So in some cases, there would be a VIP and we know the workloads behind it. In some cases, it would be opaque. I don't know. We'd probably have to spec it out for the different cases. But
yeah, there's a decision to be made about whether at least in the plain sandwich modes, right, where it just looks like TCP traffic going to the gateway, which IP it sees. Right, that's really the discussion point. Is it the VIP? Is it the endpoint? Is it what was the original destination? Yeah. I suspect most gateways that are not implementing HBone or the proxy protocol would prefer to see their own IP, because that's probably what they bound to. It's the one they most likely bound to. Anyway, that's probably a pretty low-level detail for this discussion. So then, assuming we can, so like, leaving aside terminology and standards and some of the details that Custom brought up, do people think this is a good idea? Because this is pretty important, right? This really dictates how people use waypoints in this geometry going forward, right? Which is a pretty fundamental feature of ambient. It seems like this facilitates extensive interoperability, which is what we were trying to achieve. It seems like it's a reasonable API to do so. And it gives waypoint implementers a graded kind of continuum of integration capability, all the way from, I'm just a proxy, I don't know anything about Istio, to I'm an Istio-specific waypoint and I know everything about source and destination metadata and I implement Istio APIs.
I think this is fantastic. I love the idea of building out sort of a network utility ecosystem that other players can participate in equally. I think that's fantastic. You know, I saw some comments on having particularly a listener name match a service name, that being a little bit awkward and not a paradigm that I think is used elsewhere, but I'm pretty sure the small details like that are things that we could iron out in a standardized way. They don't deeply concern me.
Yeah, as the one that wrote that, I hate it as well and think we should get rid of it. But I share the same sentiment. I think the broad strokes of this is definitely right. We'll have to work out some of the details for sure.
Any chance we can find some money to buy mesh TLD?
Probably not, Custom. Also, the implication of your question is probably not something I'd actually want to do, but sure.
Well,
anyway,
I've been trying to buy ist.io for years, rather than having our website be Istio-yo. Could just be Istio, but it's owned by a German supermarket and they really like their website. So
yeah, pry it from their cold refrigerated German hands. Okay, so I like this pattern. I think this works well. So there's this kind of now, what I think should happen, John, feel free to correct me. We make this the top level proposal in your doc, or you make a new doc out of it. We try to make sure it aligns with the kind of conformance and contract doc, right? So that they express, I guess, this describes the UX, right, in the kind of feature in a kind of perspective looking way, and the contract doc should be, look, here are the rules, right, that if you want to do this, here's how you align. And maybe we just merge the two documents. Yes, everybody's trying to avoid magic. The only thing that's, right, Z-tunnel is, like, let's be clear, Z-tunnel is a little magical, not super magic, right, compared to typical L4 networks that have the ability to do things like this. Like, I can use BGP to send VIP service traffic to somewhere else, but maybe BGP is magic. But that's the only construction thing that is really the binding between the two layers, right? It's, hey, Z-tunnel, I want you to send traffic for this thing here instead. And it's not that magical, really.
Yeah, going back to what you said on next steps, I think that sounds reasonable. One thing I will say is that technically both things in this doc could happen. I don't think they will, probably, at least on the short term, but the top half of the proposal was a higher level API that effectively generated exactly the resources on the bottom half. Now we're saying the users will do that manually, and we'll try very hard to make that UX nice, but you could always add a higher level API over this, right?
Except for the DNS part, right? Like that's different.
Yeah. Like the mechanisms we're using are slightly different, but it's very similar. So if users hate this for some reason or whatever, like you can always add high level APIs over very cleanly defined low level APIs. But if you just have a terrible high level API, then there's not much you can do from there. So.
Well, we should make it clear, right, that this is a top level proposal, right?
It is. Yeah. But there's also like lighter weight options, right? Like today we have Easter Cuddle Waypoint Apply. You could have something similar, or a Helm chart or something that deploys a waypoint.
Oh yeah.
So like there's all sorts of ways if people find like this amount of YAML to be hard. I think it's more important to have a solid foundation, and you can always build layers. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like there's still the contract, right, where the gateway says it's a waypoint and it says I want to capture this stuff, right, is still the fundamentals of the proposal.
Yeah, I have no worries about being able to add good syntactical sugar on top of this to make it a little bit quicker for our users. That should be trivial.
I would mention, you call it proposal, but it's not proposal. It's something that is possible today. I think the proposal is to promote this as kind of the official way or better way or best practice or whatever. But it's not, people can choose to do it today, and all the infrastructure and automation on top of it can be done with any implementation of gateways. We can optimize, we can do some extensions, but the rest, it's, John.
I half agree. One, I think us saying this is the way to do it, even on its own, is important, but still, what this is proposing is one, removing the current way of waypoints, and we are also adding the secure network integration part, which is non-trivial. But yes, like that is the main point of this is really to use the standard. So it is a much smaller proposal than the original waypoint one was, which was kind of making our own thing, right? And there is also the workload forward proxy thing, which is not part of the Gateway API spec, which maybe we should start bringing into at least starting discussions there for standardizing that.
Yeah, so
some of these seem like they might be good conversations for Gamma Gateway API in terms of standardization.
Technically, we're not. Well, we are mesh, and it's a Gateway API for mesh, but they have focused on a different API model, which is interesting. I did bring this up. Actually, I didn't get a chance, but I put it on the agenda for Gamma, but we ran out of time, which is probably good because we changed the proposal since then. So I will bring it up in the next meeting.
Yeah, I think this is maybe more like work for service than Gamma, right? At least in the terms of like, there's going to be some evolution of service in Kubernetes. It's been dangled out there in the community for years, but it hasn't made a lot of headway. Where you want to be able to say this services traffic goes here in a more flexible way. I know Tim talks about it at KubeCon. Keith, do you want to enlighten people on that one? Keith? Maybe his microphone has died. I think the only other thing that's not clear, right? We have Istio Waypoint, which is a waypoint, is a special one in the sense that it can do whatever we want it to do, and not what Nginx or Apache or HA Proxy wants to do, right? It is. So we have to decide what we want its default behavior to be, and to obviously make the UX of that as good as possible.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. So I agree with what you said, Louis. Tim talked about this at KubeCon, and we discussed it a bit in a recent kind of Gateway API Gamma meeting. That this is where service is going. I do think there's the value here is for the greater community upstream in Kubernetes is being able to do what you said in a standard way, saying instead of so traffic bound for this service should go to this thing instead. And there's no easy way to do that right now. I don't know if anybody's working on that. Well, okay, you've got external name. You could do it like that, but it's not great. So I think if we can get that to be standard and then implement that in Istio, I think we've really created a great pattern for doing more powerful networking things within Kubernetes. And I think the proposals is there's a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually suspect that this is not the evolution of service, because if we talk about the evolution of service, I would imagine you have a way to do this, but you also have a way to just use a standard L3 kube proxy type thing. Like Kubernetes core is not going to accept a L4 only service or L7 only service through a waypoint, right? So maybe part of a bigger picture. But I don't know that it's there yet, and it doesn't necessarily need to be. It would be good to sync up with folks like Tim and stuff to see if this is directionally aligned, though, or can be tweaked in some small ways to make it more future-proof, though.
I don't think revolution of service means completely removing service and all its capabilities. It means just for L7, don't use service, use this, and for keep using service for backend and what it is good at. But just.
It could. I mean, that's what we're saying now. In my mind, the ideal, if I had a magic wand and years of API work, there'd be one API that you can say, this is implemented at L3 or L7 or, things of that nature. Now, that's not realistic, so it's probably more hypothetical. I kind of agree with Keith. Like, a service is not really going anywhere, so it's more about how we fit into the existing service.
Okay. Well, obviously, if we wait for service to evolve, we'll be waiting at least 1 or 2 millennia. So we do need to do something, and this seems like a pretty concrete approach. We can always adapt and support what service refactors to later. In addition to this, I don't think there's an impediment to doing that. So anyway, I think since we're running low on time, get your comments in. John and I will work on harmonizing this, the conformance requirement document, and also in conjunction harmonizing that with the authorization policy proposal. And hopefully between those 3 things, we think we've solved most of the user-facing API/enrollment issues with Ambient. That would allow us to go to beta. That is clearly we're trying to get that done. Obviously, there are other architectural and technical things about going to beta that these don't say anything about, which we will continue to discuss in the beta tracking meetings that Lynn is driving.
That sounds great. With that, I'm going to share the beta tracking doc in the chat for people to take a look. So just to summarize, we've been having some meetings in the past 2 days, 2 working days, and the goal of the meeting is trying to figure out what we can ship in the time frame of KubeCon EU, which is March, last week in March. So I think everybody agrees it would be nice to ship something, and everybody kind of agrees if we can ship something, layer 4 would be the first thing we would ship as beta, and potentially layer 7 as a follow-up in a slightly different release. So I've been actually identify some work item out of the meeting, you know, kind of reset up our board. Certainly what Louis was talking about, not everything is for layer 4, but it would at least help us understand the user impact for layer 4 and potentially for layer 7 as well, so that we can feel comfortable to go to beta, even just for layer 4.
Okay. Do you have anything else? Any last minute topics?
I just want to talk quick about next steps for this. It sounds like everyone is directionally on board. Where do people think we need to go from here to going and sending a PR that removes a lot of code and adds a little bit of code?
So one thing I do want to understand, I don't think I fully understand. Certainly, I like this a lot. I don't fully understand is as we're trying to drive beta for layer 4, what are the impact for that work of this proposal? To me, it feels like maybe impact are minimum because most of this are related to waypoint.
It's probably none, but we need to figure out the layering of the auth policy stuff, which is not actually probably, yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing. I would say that this contract, in terms of the redirection, even if L7 wasn't beta, it would be pretty disruptive to alpha feature users if this radically changed. So I don't see any reason why we can't get this contract well specified enough that we feel like it's stable across the alpha beta boundary. But yeah, I think it is authorization policy and agreeing on what the layeringness of authorization policy is, which is a parallel track of discussion that we're running right now. If we can figure that out, then I think that's the major. If taking L4 to beta is the requirement, or L4 only to beta is the requirement, we could also, in theory, take this contract to beta. And that might be, even though, let's say, Istio waypoint itself is not beta, the contract between the layer, the L4 layer, and any waypoint is beta. So we have to have that discussion, I think.
Interesting. So this is to minimize the impact when waypoint becomes beta. Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty nuanced. I think we could probably get to that. I think hopefully most of the remaining discussion is on technicality. So. Okay, so we're out of time. Go put your comments in. If there are details about this, go wrap your head around them. There are plenty of comments in there already. John and I will work on resolving them and getting these things refined, as well as thinking through the UX a little bit more.
Thank you both. This is really cool to see this come to fruition. I've heard you talk about it for a long time, and I'm excited to see it happen.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.